Hi, my name's Elizabeth, and I'm doing my topic presentation on Aeschylus or Asteia. The main topics of my presentation today are mainly going to revolve around forgiveness, revenge, and justice, and how they affect each other. To start off my presentation, I have two discussion questions for you guys. My first question is, can murder be justified if it was done in order to avenge another person's murder? And my second question is, are revenge and justice the same things? My presentation today will mainly be revolving around the ideas presented in these questions. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to write down these questions and think for a little bit on what they may mean in the context of Aeschylus or Asteia and in the real world. Also, make sure you keep these questions in mind throughout my presentation. Hopefully you guys had enough time to finish writing down those two discussion questions. Next in my presentation, I'll be showing you guys a video that analyzes one of these questions. Here I have a short clip of a TEDx presentation done by Elisabeth Bernardini. It's titled, Is Revenge Justified? Elisabeth's presentation is done in the context of her grandmother's first-hand experience with the Holocaust and the way her grandmother dealt with the moral dilemma of forgiving or getting revenge against the soldiers who held her in concentration camps. Elizabeth analyzes the question of whether or not revenge is justified if it is done to avenge the deaths of others, which is similar to the moral dilemma that Orestes was faced with. And it's also similar to the first discussion question I asked you guys today.
Maybe. They were the ones causing the river to flow red with the blood of people, of men, of women, of the elderly, of children. Do those men deserve to be killed? Would that have meant justice for my family for those 40,000? Well, you could say, those 3 men don't nearly make up for the loss of so many. Or you could say it's not fair to kill those if we don't know what they did. Maybe those 3 men, they had wives, children, and a life. But so did those who were brutally murdered. And so what is the true answer here? To be brief, I don't know. I don't know. Let's say my grandmother had exposed those men. Would that guilt, that burden, haunt my grandmother that she stooped to their level? Obviously, turning those men in for their likely crimes is nothing like murdering innocents. It is still taking away 3 human lives. Would that guilt hang over my grandmother's head for the rest of her own? Or in turn, would it grant her a sense of satisfaction that those men were brought to justice for their crimes? Because let's face it, simple party member or active sniper, those 3 men were part of the party and thus contributed to the violence. Anyway, I digress. So what do you think? This issue will never have a black and white answer. Sometimes, depending on the situation, the answer will be clear, and other times it will not.
Elisabeth goes over the pros and cons of possibly getting revenge, and she also looks at the situation from multiple perspectives. Although the speaker was not able to give a definite answer of whether or not revenge is justified, she does analyze the two sides of the moral dilemma. Because, to paraphrase what she said towards the end of the clip, maybe there is no right or wrong answer. Mahatma Gandhi was most well known for preaching forgiveness and peace, and in one of his most well-known quotes he says, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." He's basically saying that if people constantly keep getting revenge against one another for past wrongdoings, then this cycle of revenge will never end until everyone has been hurt. Instead, he believed that we should forgive each other rather than get revenge or justice. My second quote is "an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." This was one of the many laws written by the Babylonian king Hammurabi in Hammurabi's Code. Hammurabi's Code is one of the earliest deciphered set of laws, and rather than preaching forgiveness like Gandhi, it contained rules and punishments to enact justice on people if those rules were ever broken. Again, we are faced with the question of whether or not justice and revenge are the same things, like in my second discussion question. Gandhi likely views justice to be the same as revenge, since he believes that an eye for an eye will end up unnecessarily damaging everyone in the process. However, it can be reasonably assumed from Hammurabi's code that Hammurabi viewed revenge and justice as two separate things. We can assume this because Hammurabi's code was technically meant to be written as a way of getting justice in order to even the scale and cleanse people of their crimes. Hammurabi's goal with this law was likely so that the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth could simply end right there, instead of creating a process like Gandhi believed would happen. Now, using these two quotes and my second discussion question, simply compare and contrast the two ideas that these famous quotes were summarizing. This part of my presentation is technically not mandatory, however, it can be helpful for you later in the future. For your digital archive post, write a summary explaining how forgiveness and justice go hand in hand. Although there are clear differences between forgiveness and justice, explain how the two can be similar, like the reason there is even a need to choose between forgiveness and justice, or even what the final results may be after choosing to forgive someone or after choosing to pursue justice against them. Now I'll give you guys a couple minutes to just jot down your thoughts in order to get a head start on your digital archive post. Also, keep in mind that if you do need more time, you can always just pause the video. Hopefully you guys were able to get something down for your digital archive post. Now we're going to be moving on to the next section of my presentation, which has to do with the Odyssey and how it goes hand in hand with Aeschylus' Oresteia. Most of you have likely read the Odyssey before in high school, and if you remember correctly, there are actually many mentions of Orestes within the epic poem. This is because the Odyssey and Aeschylus' Oresteia are actually written within the same world. Now we'll examine two quotes from the Odyssey and analyze how Orestes' story had impacted the Odyssey. My first quote is, "Look at Aegisthus. Now, above and beyond his share, he stole Atrides' wife. He murdered the warlord coming home from Troy, though he knew it meant his own total ruin. Far in advance we told him so ourselves, dispatching the guide, the giant killer Hermes. Don't murder the man, he said. Don't court his wife. Beware, revenge will come from Orestes, Agamemnon's son. That day he comes of age and longs for his native land." So Hermes warned, with all the good will in the world, but would Aegisthus's hardened heart give way? Now he pays the price, all at a single stroke. This is just a small section of the conversation that Zeus was having with the other gods when he was complaining about humans' misconduct. This quote comes from the chapter Athena Inspires the Prince. Zeus is talking with the other gods about how humans have no self-control and how they're the cause of their own demise due to their self-destructive behavior. And as an example of this behavior, he mentions the affair between Aegisthus and Clytemnestra. Because although Aegisthus was told of the consequences and deaths the two of them would face if he were to have an affair with Clytemnestra, he still chose to have an affair with her, just so he could enact revenge against Agamemnon. And it's this kind of behavior that had angered Zeus. The affair between Aegisthus and Clytemnestra had a great effect on the Odyssey. Because, after watching the aftermath of Aegisthus and Clytemnestra's affair and the inevitable deaths of the two, Zeus becomes annoyed with humans and their misconduct. However, the one human he does not get annoyed with is Odysseus. In fact, he actually puts Odysseus on a pedestal, and Zeus even views him as one of his favorite human beings. Zeus even begins to feel sorry for Odysseus and all the hardships he's being put through. So in order to make Odysseus' life slightly easier, Zeus calls upon Athena and asks her to help guide Odysseus' son, Telemachus, in order to help make him stronger so that he is able to protect their household while Odysseus is away. In my next quote, you'll see how Athena's help with Telemachus' troubles had a great effect on the Odyssey. The second quote I have for you today is, "You must not cling to your boyhood any longer. It's time you were a man. Haven't you heard what glory Prince Orestes won throughout the world when he killed that cunning, murderous Aegisthus who'd killed his famous father?" This is just a small section of the inspiring conversation that Athena had with Telemachus in order to help encourage him to defeat the suitors in his home. This quote also comes from the chapter Athena Inspires the Prince. Athena is called for by Zeus in order to help guide Telemachus in order to help him gather the strength to be brave. Telemachus in the Odyssey was extremely young when his father had first left, so he had never learned how to protect his family or his home. Due to Odysseus' absence, many suitors came to his home in search of Odysseus' wife, and while there, the suitors took advantage of their home by eating their food and drinking their wine. Telemachus is unsure of how to defend his mother and home from these suitors, so Athena tries to encourage Telemachus by telling him the story of how Orestes avenged his father's death by killing his father's murderer and killing his mother. Orestes' brave story had a great effect on the Odyssey, because if it had not been for his story, Athena would not have been able to guide Telemachus as effectively. Orestes' brave story had helped instill a sense of strength and bravery in Telemachus. This gave Telemachus the courage to face his mother's suitors and kick them out of their home, as well as kill them, so that he is finally able to take control of his home. If it had not been for Orestes' famous story, it would have been likely that Telemachus would have never gained the courage to protect his own home, and he would have been forced to continue living in that home that had been taken advantage of by suitors. So that's all the content that I have for you guys today. Although there's likely no complete right or wrong answer to the discussion questions I asked you at the beginning of my presentation, I hope those questions were able to help guide you and assist you into thinking more critically on the ideas of forgiveness, justice, and revenge. And hopefully you guys were able to formulate your own thoughts revolving around those ideas. Thank you for listening.